Hovind, otherwise known as Inmate 0645-2017, has had some videos that I've been meaning to cover for some time now. That project was put on the back burner, and during that time, the convicted fraud pulled them down for some reason. It took him forever to put them back up, and I knew he would eventually, but by the time he had, I'd been sidetracked by other topics and individuals. Now it's time to get back into it. Welcome to the Nexus. 0645-2017 made a series of videos targeting children specifically, pushing his pseudoscience nonsense directly to them through YouTube Kids. Alucard and I will be addressing them and the misrepresentations within them. He's joining us via hologram on the grid because transporter technology classifies the undead as fully dead, and vampires collapse when they rematerialize. And he would be exposed to hazardous amounts of solar radiation in a shuttle, which is apparently very unhealthy for vampires as well. His minions were valiantly voluntold to participate for scientific progress, and were given a traditional burial in space, as in what was left was ejected into space. His connection is spotty because of his end. The Nexus is state-of-the-art, but Alucard got his communications gear secondhand. Very secondhand. Because of the nature of his videos, we were debating on setting these as being for children to provide actual scientific explanations to offset what he's already put out there. We decided not to list these as being for kids specifically, partly because we wanted to avoid potential complications from COPA and because it isn't our place to make YouTube Kids a battleground between Hovind and ourselves, as tempted as we were to do so. They'll see that front when they become young adults, which is where this series is aimed. And as much as we hate that he has done this, it ultimately does fall to the parents to pay attention to what their kids watch. And if they watch his content and start to ask their parents about his nonsense, the parents can hopefully set them straight. It isn't our place to try to force kids to believe anything, including whether or not a God exists, or if what he says is nothing but a bunch of lies. That is ultimately a decision they will have to make. But fortunately, unlike Hovind, we have the scientific community with literally tons of evidence, research, working models, and all the facts on our side, as well as some class. Now, you'll notice that we're going to be referring to Hovind in one of three ways throughout this entire deal. Either as Hovind, 0645-2017, which was his prisoner number when he was imprisoned for fraud, or Mr. Hovind. We will not call him doctor, and there's a very good reason for that. He's not actually a doctor. His doctorate degree, which is what you need to be called a doctor, is not from an accredited institution, which means that it does not meet the standards required to actually claim the title of doctor or any legitimate degree in the first place. Because of that, his degree is not legitimate and is effectively fake, not worth the paper that it's printed on. As for him saying evolution is a religion, well, that isn't true. A religion is a faith-based belief system that says some part of you survives the death of the physical body in some way. Evolution is not a religion in any way, by any definition, since it is based on evidence and has nothing to do with the origin of the universe, what our purpose is, or anything else. The only thing that it explains is how the life we have on this planet changes and diversifies over time.
I just need to say something before we get started. In a moment, Inmate 064552-017 is going to claim he taught math and science for 15 years. Adam?
Hi folks, welcome to Dinosaur Adventureland in Lenox, Alabama. My name is Kent Hovind. I was a high school science and math teacher for 15 years.
And this is complete crap. Inmate 064552-017 has no legitimate teaching credentials in any of the 50 U.S. states. Keep that in mind.
And 30 years ago began the Ministry of Creation Science Evangelism. We want to use everything about God's amazing creation to draw people to Christ instead of turn people away like the evolution religion does. So our science center here is amazing. It's all free. Come on down and see what we're doing. We base it on the 7 days of creation. Day one, God said, let there be light. So we've got a lot of experiments in this room about light, electricity, magnetism, gravity. Day two, he made the atmosphere. So we got all kinds of science experiments about air, air pressure, torus cannon, Bernoulli blower, Venturi vacuum, all that stuff. And so we go through the 7 days of creation and then the flood in the days of Noah.
Day one has plenty of things we need to talk about, and the rest we'll cover in turn. I'm going to skip some of what he says here because it isn't part of anything that actually needs to be covered. It's an attempt to poison the well, one of many fallacious arguments he's known to use. His empty threat of a coming judgment is not a valid point, as he has never been able to show a God exists in any way at all. His usual deal about scoffers and all is meaningless to me as well. It's just a carrot or stick spiel that always comes up with him. I'm here to address the idea that the universe was created around 6,000 years ago, as well as his idea that science, which directly refutes him, is part of some big conspiracy to make people reject the Bible, both of which are false. Cindy Lincoln takes over, so we'll be taking a look at what she says, and all of it comes from Mr. Hovind and his complete misunderstanding or misrepresentation of the subjects that are coming up and what the science really shows. She's a new face, and I don't know really a whole lot about her other than I think she's his newest wife. He's up to 3 now, apparently. Regardless, she is another misled and misinformed victim of the con man and convicted fraud that is Hovind.
Welcome to our Science Center, where God gets the glory for his creation instead of evolution, because we are sick of that. Our kids are being taught, and our college students, our adults, everybody's being taught that in the beginning, dinosaurs ruled the earth.
No, evolution does not teach that in the beginning dinosaurs ruled the earth. They only ruled over a period between the last 2 mass extinction events this planet had. The period of time between the Great Dying, which was caused by a series of huge volcanic eruptions several hundreds of millions of years ago, that made the Siberian traps, and the KT extinction, which was caused by an asteroid thought to be about twice the size of Texas, hitting what is now an area near the Yucatan Peninsula about 66 million years ago. The time between that period was ruled by the dinosaurs. But before that, there was a time where they didn't rule the world, and the world was full of different life, unlike anything we have today.
And it was a terrible place with T-Rexes and blood and volcanoes, and you wouldn't want to be there. Now the Bible, on the other hand, teaches that God made paradise in the beginning. It was the Garden of Eden. It was beautiful. Everybody would want to be there. Somebody's wrong. And we are here to present the evidence that we know that the Bible is the true one, okay? So the Bible teaches in the beginning there were no dinosaurs. It was only God and some kind of water. The Bible says darkness was on the face of the deep and the Spirit of God moved on the face of the waters. And the first thing he said was, let there be light. So this room is all about light.
I know the way she said that sounds pretty bad, but the truth is that animals eat other animals today just like they did back then. Carnivores still go after herbivores, and that won't change. We still have volcanoes today, and sometimes eruptions happen just like they did in the past. During the time she's talking about, it was actually pretty close to the kind of world we have today, with the only real difference being the wildlife and that people weren't around yet. So yeah, someone is wrong. The writers of the Bible didn't know what we know today because they didn't have the tools that we do. Science has used those tools to improve what we know about the world and the universe, and what we learned let us make some pretty neat discoveries. Medicines and food are things that we have made because of what we have learned from evolution alone, like antibiotics or vaccines. Many foods we have today started out very different, like corn, which started like this. A grass called teosinte, before we turned it into this by picking and planting the ones we liked most over time.
To be clear, we need to define a couple of things before we keep going. First is what is evidence? Evidence is a collection of information that shows one explanation to be true over another. A fact is just a piece of information that can be verified by others. This is clearly shown that the writers of the Bible didn't know what we do today. Thanks to modern science, we know how old the Earth is, that it isn't flat, that there's no fountains of the deep, there never was a firmament of any kind, that outer space isn't full of water, that the Earth orbits around the sun and the stars are not beings with human characteristics that can be blown out of the sky or come down to do battle with a random guy. None of which biblical authors knew, which is why they believed those things. Saying, "Let there be light," is an incantation spell, a form of magic. Magic is a supernatural explanation, meaning that it's not natural. It also means that it is not something we can test in an experiment or name a point where it should fail to show the idea we have to explain it as wrong. So it is not and cannot be a hypothetical, and it is not something we can consider as an explanation in science.
So, light. What you might not know is light is part of an electromagnetic spectrum. It involves phone waves, radio waves, microwaves, infrared waves, and only this little bit is visible. Ultraviolet, X-ray, gamma, these are all invisible, except a little part of visible light.
Most of what she said here is true. The electromagnetic spectrum does cover all electromagnetic radiation, and what makes the types different is the wavelength, the distance from peak to peak, and the frequency, how many times per second that peak is measured, both of which will determine the raw amount of energy that each type has. Radio waves, including cell phone signals, which are not separate from radio waves, have very long wavelengths, low frequency and very low energy. Gamma rays at the opposite end have short wavelengths, high frequency, and a very high energy behind them. We can only see a small section of the entire electromagnetic spectrum between the ultraviolet and infrared sections, but some animals can see some of the infrared and ultraviolet bits. While it would be neat to be able to see some of the rest of the spectrum, we developed to see color the way we do, likely to tell good food from the kind that would harm us, what was ripe and what wasn't. That means we have to be able to see the colors that we do, and seeing into other spectrums wasn't really useful for us, so we never developed the ability.
So, for example, phone waves. When you're talking on the phone, something invisible is going to your friend. We did not invent that. We don't even create it. We just found it. We discovered what God had made and we write it. We use it. Same with radio waves.
There are a couple of problems here. First, like I said before, phone signals are radio waves. Yes, the signal is invisible to us, and yes, all of the electromagnetic spectrum is always present, like the cosmic background microwave radiation that you hear with the right type of radio and the right frequency selected. But we can create those signals. From radio waves up to some gamma rays, we can make them ourselves because it's nothing more than the generation of energy and sending it through a transmitter or a waveguide. The electromagnetic spectrum is a natural thing, and it does not need magic to explain it.
And by the way, the stars, which are a light source, make all of these. When you look up at the stars at night, all you see is white light or a twinkle of a different color, but we can't see all these other things that the stars are putting out. And by the way, you'll notice stars aren't created yet. God is the light.
Yes, stars are putting out all of the electromagnetic spectrum in various amounts, with some stars putting out more or less of different types of radiation than others do. All of the electromagnetic spectrum requires a source of some kind. like the cosmic microwave background radiation being caused by the formation of the earliest elements when the nuclei of light elements such as hydrogen and helium formed and captured electrons. None of those sources are a god, and none of them actually really need a god. What she just said there is something she cannot back up at all.
Visible white light. If you take white light and you bend it, it will break into its parts. We will see what is it made of. And from this picture of the prism, you can see it's made of all the colors of the rainbow. Now, if you and me take crayons, all the colors of the rainbow, and we put them in one spot on our paper, will we get white?
No.
No, it's going to be like brown. But God doesn't use crayon, he uses light, and he can mix them all together and make white.
Mixing Crayola colors will make a mess of brownish wax, yes. But Crayolas and light are two completely different things. You can take the colored light from a prism and put it through a second one, like so, to get white light again. But why does the prism do this? Well, like we already talked about, the light we see is a small part of the electromagnetic spectrum. Light travels in waves, and the wavelengths are different depending on the color. Red is the longest wavelength and the slowest, and violet is the shortest and the fastest. What a prism does is cause the light to travel at different speeds inside it, and because the different colors move at different speeds, they come out of the prism spread out. That's why you can use a second prism to change the speed again so it comes out as white light, just a tiny bit dimmer from going through two thick pieces of glass. This is another thing that has a natural explanation that we don't need a magical one for. This is their first scientific demonstration, which is just a DIY prism. Why he didn't just buy one is beyond me. The most expensive individual prisms I found on a quick search was still under $20 from Walmart, and Amazon had a set of 3 for even less than that. Anyway, the light will pass through the slit, travel down the tube, and be refracted by the DVD at the end. The observational hole in the top has you looking through at the edge of the DVD with your back to the light. The two bulbs are incandescent and fluorescent, and they refract differently, as we will see.
Tell me, what do you see?
Red, yellow, orange, green, blue, purple.
Okay, your regular rainbow, just like in a preschool. Okay, now let's see a not regular rainbow. And tell me, what's different?
Red, orange, green, yellow, red, green, green, blue, green, dark blue.
Do you notice a difference between the two rainbows?
Yes.
Could you put it in words?
Yes. No.
No, I know. Most people don't, but some people can say, like when Mommy did it yesterday, she said, well, the first one, they're all touching, they're blended. The second one, they're like divided by black or silver bands. So it's like striped, okay?
So they used the same setup to see the refraction. But why did the bulbs give a different refraction? The answer is in how the light bulbs make the light that they do. Incandescent bulbs run energy through a filament. A flow of electricity works much like the flow of water. Trying to force large amounts of water through a small opening increases the pressure, in much the same way that putting a large amount of electricity through a very small conductor like a filament generates a lot of heat. And in a light bulb, that heat radiates out as light, which is what we call white light. And so it splits the way that sunlight does in a prism. Fluorescent bulbs generate their light differently. I'll be leaving some of the more technical bits out to save time, but basically an electrical arc ionizes mercury vapor. That means the arc rips electrons off the mercury atoms, and this produces light frequencies in the UV spectrum, which is converted into visible light using the phosphor coating inside the tube. Because of this, the light is close enough to the naked, unaided eye to be visually not much different than an incandescent bulb, but the spectrum is different because of the way the light was generated. It's distorted due to the heavy presence of UV wavelengths, which gives the effect that she mentioned. Apparently, all of these come with a spiritual lesson as well.
So what we're going to learn, our spiritual lesson, is how even if things look the same on the outside, for example, you could put either one of these bulbs in that light bulb holder, and you're going to get light up the room. And you won't know that they're different. So it's kind of like people, okay? We look the same on the outside too. We've got 2 arms, 2 legs, 2 eyes, 2 ears, and a nose. But God sees what we're made of. He sees our heart, whether our deeds be good or evil.
The problem is that God doesn't care what you do. It doesn't matter what you do. Everything will be forgiven if you believe. On the other hand, if you don't believe, it doesn't matter how good you are. You'll still be condemned. You're judged by whether or not you believe, not on your actions.
So we have a scripture for that. The Lord sees not as man sees, for man looks on the outward appearance, but the Lord looks on the heart. He can see inside you what you're made of. And he can actually see your thoughts and your intentions. Okay? Is that kind of cool?
No, that's creepy. She's making a lot of claims on the ability of God, but not giving anything to back it up in any verifiable way, which is a good indication that it isn't real. This is also why young kids are targeted very heavily. If adults that you trust tell you that something neither you or them can see or detect in any way is always watching you, then you will eventually start to believe it and convince yourself it's real through the auto-deceptive power of faith. Faith is a position held without any evidence, and quite often despite evidence to the contrary. Since faith is not based on evidence, the only way you can believe it is through willful self-deception and ignoring everything that shows you to be wrong.
Now another thing is, our eyes that cannot see these waves, other eyes can. For example, the mosquito. He sees heat. That's how come he can see any red-blooded person, even in the dark.
To be clear, yes, mosquitoes can see infrared, but not very well, and can't use it more than a distance of a few inches to determine where their host is in relation to what's around it. They rely on another form of sight that is motion sensitive, scent, and an ability to detect carbon dioxide exhaled by a potential host primarily. They don't just feed on humans either. Any warm-blooded animal can be a potential host, including us.
So these are some examples of what the same thing might look like with a different eye. Here's an infrared, here's an X-ray. Different eyes can see different things. So this is our eye here on this planet at this time. Dr. Hovind says when we get to heaven, maybe we'll have bigger, better, stronger, faster eyes, and we'll be able to see all kinds of other things that are invisible to us right now. Never know? Hovind theory.
Those images are not what other animals can see. No animal we know of can see radio, microwave, X-ray, or gamma. We use specialized instrumentation to detect those wavelengths and translate the input into something that we can see. The animals that can see in ultraviolet and infrared see a very limited section of those, just beyond our visual threshold either direction. It isn't terribly detailed either in most cases, and certainly not something that can be used from great distances or to the acuity shown in pop culture by creatures like the predator, and isn't what the animal relies on to find prey or whatever else they see. I feel the need to point out again that Hovind is not a doctor, and that his Hovind theory is nothing but his own unsupported opinion. He uses that term deliberately to misrepresent what the word theory means in science. A theory in science is a body of knowledge explaining something in nature. It's proven in the legal sense as having an overwhelming amount of evidence supporting it, and it gives us predictive power. Hovind does not have a scientific theory. He has nothing. No testable or falsifiable hypothesis that is repeatable, no explanation for anything, no evidence, and absolutely no predictive power.
Okay, now electromagnetic electromagnetic. Electricity and magnetism are actually part of light as well. So we're going to go on to our Tesla coil, which is the first electric demonstration. This is everybody's favorite. The Tesla coil is a transformer. It's going to transform regular 110 power into like 110,000. I don't know the number, but it's going to be lightning. Okay? So what happens is it goes through the cord, the regular 110 power, and it goes around this coil. And then these are actually little coils. So it's going to go around and around the big coil and then around and around the little coil. And that amplifies the power. Okay? Transformer.
Just to be clear, the electromagnetic spectrum is made up from electromagnetic iterations. There's too much to really get into here, and it gets into particle physics as well, so we'll focus on what she's saying here. She is right that electricity and magnetism are inseparable, but her explanation of the Tesla coil needs work. I'm going to keep it as simple as I can. Yes, a Tesla coil is a transformer, but a very specific type. A resonant transformer. The one she is about to use in her demonstration is what's called a static spark gap coil. They are used primarily for entertainment and educational purposes now, and can take residential power and turn it into high voltage, low current, high frequency discharges of around 500,000 to 1,000,000 volts, depending on the construction. What happens is that the electrical power from the wall outlet is run into a transformer that steps up the power output and feeds it into a capacitor. Capacitors are like batteries, but instead of a slow discharge of electricity like a battery, they discharge quickly all at once. When the capacitor has enough power built up, it breaks through the resistance of the air to jump the gap between it and the lead to the primary coil at the base. You'll see that through the acrylic base in a minute. Son of a... Oh my god, you complete...
We'll just let him cool off for a bit. Hovind can have that effect on people. To be clear, a coil like this is extremely dangerous, and the distance that they will be from the coil is not beyond where this thing is capable of arcing to. Everyone in the room is in immediate danger of being electrocuted. This type of coil needs more than 20 feet to be considered somewhat safe. They're on a rubber mat, which does not eliminate the danger, and they are still far too close to it for safety. Anyway, that surge of energy creates a magnetic field. Powerful, but it collapses quickly. The secondary coil that runs up from the base isn't actually connected to the primary. When the magnetic field is generated by the primary, it creates an electric current in the secondary through the law of induction, which is trying to go to ground, but it can't. Eventually, the charge in a secondary capacitor at the top of the coil gets high enough that it discharges into the air as ionized plasma arcs. The goal with these transformers is to time the discharge to get the peak amount of energy from a fresh magnetic field the instant the first dissipates, building the power in the secondary coil as quickly as possible and keeping the discharge at the top constant, resonating. The arcs being ionized plasma can illuminate even burned out fluorescent bulbs by ionizing the gases inside like we talked about earlier, and you'll see that here soon. If you let these run long enough, the ionization will make the smell of ozone. So, as we saw, it not only creates all the effects described earlier, it also generates a sound. These things are obscenely loud. To save your hearing, I turned the audio down for this. You can tune this with the right type of coil to even play music. I'll put a couple of links below. Check it out, but don't try it at home. She said something about a spiritual lesson too. Let's check back in with Alucard.
Ass go my...
He still needs a minute.
Okay, now, like I said, the Tesla coil is a transformer, okay? The Holy Spirit is also a transformer. So our spiritual lesson is going to be about Holy Spirit being transformed from one thing to another, okay? So the two examples I like to give are when you're afraid and when you're mad. If you are afraid, let's say you really want someone that you love to know about Jesus, but you're scared if you tell them they will think you're nuts, right? You can ask God to help you. Transform me, God, make me bold. He can make you bold to where you don't care what they think because you're only here, I'm only here, we're only here for one reason, to share the light of the Lord.
That's a lie. If you believe in a God, that's your call. If you want others to believe you, then you will have to convince them, which means that they will ask you questions and potentially point out flaws in your reasoning. What she said is meant to plant the idea that it is us versus them, and that the idea that non-believers are obviously wrong, and that we will obviously respond with insults rather than questions, which I have been known to do on occasion, but after the person has made it clear they're not listening to reason or my reasons for disbelief. When we point out flaws in reasoning, we aren't attacking. We're pointing out something that needs to be properly addressed to our satisfaction because the burden of proof is on the one making the positive claim, like saying that a God exists. If you convince them, fine. If you don't, however, don't try to force it on them. This is also meant to encourage being closed-minded, to ignore everything that stands as direct evidence against the religious belief so they will never question. That is a form of mental manipulation that borders on child abuse, especially when she says that their only purpose is to spread the word and that there is no other point to life. That stifles curiosity and investigation because they already have the answer, so there's no need to look further than God did it, which is, of course, intellectually dishonest.
Okay, so let's say you're sad and mad. Let's say somebody did something wrong to you, and you are so mad at them, and you need to be transformed, right? Did you know that you can bring it to the Lord? You might have to bring it more than once. Say, Lord, I'm really mad. And he can transform you to having your joy back. Is that cool?
Okay. My brain has stopped melting. We're going to get back to this. So you're supposed to pray your anger and frustration away instead of just talking to the person or just moving on? That causes repressed feelings to build up and eventually causes you to lash out. This is another thing prayer doesn't take care of, and you're better off talking it over with the individual than bottling it up. Overall, this is horrible advice.
Okay, so we have another electric experiment or demonstration that the kids really love. This is a Van de Graaff generator. So, have you ever taken a rubber balloon and you rub your hair, and what happens? Come on, guys. It makes your hair stand up, right? So that rubbing of rubber makes electricity. Right here is a rubber band. It's gonna, when I turn this on, it's gonna start spinning around, making friction, and this is gonna become electrically charged. Now, I'm gonna call one of you up here as an innocent victim to get a little bit of a shock. Now, when you put your hands on here, the electricity will go into your body. And it will go into the ground and do nothing. So I'm gonna put you up here on an insulator, so that now the electricity is going to go into your body and not go in the ground. It's going to stay in you. And we're going to wait, and your hair is going to go like that. And when we're done getting your hair all nice and up, we're going to have you take one hand off and find someone who was mean to you this morning. It hasn't been you, Nathan. He's going to come over, and you're going to touch him. And what do you think will happen when you touch him?
Shock.
He's going to get a shock, and all the electricity is going to go out of you and into him and into the ground. And what we'll notice is your hair will just drop. As soon as the electricity goes into him, your hair drops. Are you ready? Okay, this will only hurt a little bit for a minute.
This is not entirely accurate. A common theme throughout these videos is going to be describing the effects, but not explaining the cause. This is a problem because no one is actually learning anything, and I have to do what she should have. Yes, electricity is caused by differences in energy gradients, which is what rubbing your hair on a balloon causes. The electrons, which are negatively charged, move from the hair to the balloon, leaving the balloon with a negative charge and the hair with a positive one. The attraction this causes makes the hair attract to the balloon as it is pulled away. It's not that hard to remove electrons from atoms. The ionization we saw earlier is what you get when electrons are violently stripped from their atoms. The Van de Graaff generator does the same thing the balloon does, but at a much higher voltage. It isn't just a spinning rubber band and no friction is involved here. There are a couple of brushes in there, and that is a loose term, as they aren't actually touching anything. Just close enough to allow charges to jump from place to place to build up a charge in the ball. The material in the bottom roller and the belt are made up of will determine the voltage output. Basically, it's used something like a Teflon roller and a rubber belt, which the constant making and breaking of contact build up different charges, which is called the triboelectric effect. Negative and positive charges are made respectively, and those positive charges are carried to the belt to move from the belt through the top brush in the dome connected to the dome itself. The bottom belt usually goes to ground or to a negatively charged ground wand to make a spark in some of these. I couldn't find the specific model used here, so I can't say how much power it will produce, but it doesn't look like it produces all that much. When you touch the dome and you are insulated from the ground, your body picks up these positive charges, and since the same charges repel one another, each strand of hair having the same positive charge is trying to push itself away from the others and your skin as possible, which is what makes your hair stand up. I'm going to skip this demonstration because it's obnoxiously loud, and Cindy is the one that gets shocked in the end, as it should be, because she's going to really start misleading these children as they continue on this tour.
Okay, so magnetism is next. We have electromagnetic spectrum. So we had electric, and let's do magnetic. Okay, these are magnets that we all know they attract. And if you flip them, they're going to repel. Anybody want to try it? Okay, something invisible is pushing them away, right? Okay, so something invisible is pushing these apart, but is it nothing? It's not nothing, it's something invisible. God is like that too. He's invisible. Have you ever heard people say, "Show me God. If I can see him, then I'll believe in him"? Well, we actually believe in a lot of things that are invisible. We're going to go into air on day 2. That's also invisible, but it's not nothing, and God is not nothing either. So, this is the Bible verse on that. Believing in things that you cannot see is actually how we are saved. That's what the Bible teaches, that we're saved by faith. Okay, so faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. Now, we don't want you to believe in everything that's not seen. We don't want you to believe in leprechauns or mermaids. We want you to believe in things that are not seen that have evidence. Okay, this museum is about the evidence for things unseen. Is that so cool? There's another lesson we can get from the repelling magnets. If you're in school and you're trying to do good and you think you're shining the light of the Lord, is everybody gonna like you?
No.
Not always. Maybe sometimes, but sometimes they're gonna make fun of you for being a goody two-shoes or something like that. Okay, here's a Bible verse on that. Men loved darkness rather than light because their deeds were evil. Everyone that does evil hates the light, neither comes to the light. If they won't come to the light, that means they are being repelled by the light. Thank you. Yes, we were missing a light here. So, peer pressure is a big deal for a lot of kids, and I just want them to be prepared that if you are doing good and being the light, don't expect everybody to love you. Okay?
You went there. I was hoping you wouldn't, but you did. Yes, there is something invisible holding those magnets apart. The magnetic force acts like the electrical charge in the Van de Graaff generator from earlier and repels as far away as it can. This is actually the reason we can't just walk through walls. See, atoms are generating a magnetic field. These atoms are oriented essentially randomly with different orientation and spin. When you try to, say, put your hand through a table like Vision from the Avengers, those atoms are what prevent that due to the individual repulsive actions. What makes something magnetic is when those atoms are forced into the same orientation and spin. Once they're essentially in lockstep with each other, the magnetic field effect is amplified, causing the repulsion to extend a great distance away from the source. It's the same thing as the resistance the table gives you when you try to press through it, just amplified by the orientation of all the atoms lining up in the magnets. The difference between the magnetic force, air, and God is we know the magnetic force and air exist because we can observe the effect each has, test for them, make predictions about them. There's nothing like that for a God. No test or experiment for a God, and no evidence. People generally aren't going to demand you show them God. They're going to ask how you came to the conclusion one exists and a way to test your methodology. If it doesn't turn out to be anything that is objectively verifiable, then you don't really have anything worth considering. By all indications, God is nothing. All gods are straight from the realm of imagination, evidently. The same reasoning that leads you to not believe in leprechauns and mermaids would lead to the same conclusion about God if you applied it consistently and didn't use something like the double standard or special pleading. If you cared about evidence, we wouldn't have this problem of you misrepresenting science and spreading your ignorance to these kids, Cindy. I can sort of excuse you here because you don't know any better, and Hovind has made sure of that by lying to you and everyone else that believes him, despite being consistently and constantly corrected on very basic matters. He won't ever correct his errors, mostly because his livelihood literally depends on people believing his nonsense. I personally don't care if you believe in a God or not. You can if you want, as long as it does not interfere with the lives of myself and others. You don't get to repeat lies about science to kids unchallenged, though. That I will not tolerate. I'm getting word that Alucard's comm network has exploded? Oh my. While he deals with that, I'll finish up here and send some of my guys down to help. What? Yeah, I know him and his crew of vampires. Don't worry, he gave me his word he wouldn't let anything happen. Then take some units of blood with you to throw as a distraction. Your personal shields will stop him anyway.
Let's see. I think that's all. Oh, I have one more magnetic one. Okay, this is a really cool one. This is a north-south bar magnet, just like that, and just like this. Our Earth has a North Pole and a South Pole, okay? And right now, if I put this on a white background, you see all the magnetic shavings are on the North Pole and the South Pole. And the magnetic field is invisible, okay? I'm gonna shake it up and you're going to see the magnetic field appear. You ready? Okay, I shook off the shavings from the poles. Now they're floating. Do you see a shape? Now I am going to shake it again because it works better the second time. And tell me, what shape do you see? A circle? Maybe a pumpkin? That's the magnetic field. So kind of like in Star Trek, Scotty would always put up the force field to protect the ship. Well, actually, the Lord is protecting us with this invisible shield. It doesn't protect us from everything, but it does protect us from things. Now, when you have the concentration at the poles, for example, right now you see they have all gone back to the poles. The concentration of particles at the Earth's pole is how we get the northern lights and the southern lights. The aurora borealis, and I forget the name of the southern lights. Australia something. Okay, this is going to come in useful later when we talk about the vapor canopy or the crystalline canopy. So hold that thought. And now we're going to go in to day 2.
Yes, the Earth's magnetic field does act as a shield from cosmic radiation and such, discharged by the sun. It isn't a god that causes that, though. The Earth's magnetic field is generated by a dynamo from the molten nickel iron core we have. This could be an episode all to itself, and we are still trying to nail down the whole process, but at this point we know that because the molten core is spinning, it causes an electrical differential, which once going generates a magnetic field. You got to remember that this is a continent-sized ball of spinning molten metal generating our magnetosphere. And as we already covered, the effect of all that iron being in lockstep on the atomic level will generate a very large magnetic field. The energy from the sun that interacts with it is what causes the northern and southern lights, where the ionizing radiation is diverted and concentrated. And yes, you do need to keep all this in mind on day 2 of the Science Center tour, because like she says, we will be coming back to it. The canopy she mentioned will be coming up again there. What? They won't go unless I do? Fine, let me stop by the armory and I'll help him restore order.